The wagon's rear axle cracked like a gunshot, just as the sun began its descent over the Wyoming Territory, and Willa Norwood knew with certainty that their luck had finally run out. She gripped the reins harder, feeling her younger sister's fingers clutch at her worn calico dress as the vehicle lurched sideways, spilling their meager possessions across the dusty trail 3 miles outside Laramie. The year was 1878, and the 3 orphaned sisters had been traveling west for 6 weeks since their aunt's death in Kansas City left them with nothing but a rickety wagon and a letter promising work at a boarding house that probably did not exist. Willa climbed down from the driver's seat, her boots sinking into the prairie grass as she assessed the damage. The wheel had split clean through, and without money for repairs or the skills to fix it themselves, they were stranded. Her sister Wren, 16 years old with honey-colored braids, started gathering their scattered belongings while 10-year-old Winnie sat on a trunk, her face streaked with tears and trail dust. "What are we going to do?" Wren's voice wavered despite her attempt at bravery. Before Willa could answer, the sound of hoofbeats made all 3 girls turn. A lone rider approached from the direction of Laramie, sitting tall in his saddle atop a roan mare. As he drew closer, Willa could make out a man in his mid-20s wearing a dust-covered hat, leather chaps, and an expression of concern that softened his otherwise rugged features. The cowboy reined in his horse and touched the brim of his hat. "Afternoon, ladies. Looks like you have run into some trouble." Willa straightened her shoulders, trying to project confidence she did not feel. At 22 years old, she had been responsible for her sisters for nearly 2 years, and pride made her reluctant to accept help from strangers. But practical necessity won out. "Our axle broke. We were heading into Laramie." The man dismounted with easy grace and crouched beside the damaged wheel, running his hand along the splintered wood. "This wagon is not going anywhere without significant repairs. Name is Dalton Hayes. I run a cattle ranch about 2 miles north of here." He looked up at Willa, and she noticed his eyes were the color of storm clouds, deep gray with flecks of blue. "Cannot in good conscience leave you 3 out here with nightfall coming. My ranch has a bunkhouse that is empty right now since the hands are out on a cattle drive. You are welcome to stay there while we figure out what to do about your wagon." Willa hesitated, exchanging glances with Wren. They had been warned about trusting strangers on the trail, but something in Dalton Hayes' direct gaze and respectful demeanor made her instincts say he was genuine. "We do not have money to pay for lodging," Willa admitted, hating how the words tasted like failure. Dalton stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Did not ask for payment. My mother raised me better than to leave women and children stranded on the prairie. Besides, my ranch could use some company. Gets mighty quiet out there with just the livestock and my old hound dog for conversation." Winnie perked up at the mention of a dog, her tears temporarily forgotten. "What is the dog's name?" A smile softened Dalton's weathered face. "Rufus. He is about as useful as a broken spur, but good company nonetheless." The decision was made. Dalton helped them load what they could carry onto his horse and into bundles they could manage, promising to send someone back for the wagon. As they walked north across the rolling grassland, Winnie chattered away about the dog while Wren pointed out wildflowers and Willa tried to ignore how aware she was of Dalton's steady presence beside them. The Hayes Ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was larger than Willa had expected, with a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, several outbuildings, and miles of fencing stretching into the distance. Cattle dotted the landscape like brown and white boulders, and chickens scratched in a coop near the barn. "It is not much, but it is home," Dalton said with understated pride. "Bunkhouse is over there. It has a stove, bunks, and should be relatively clean. I will bring over some firewood and supplies for supper." The bunkhouse was simple but serviceable, with 6 bunks, a potbelly stove, a wooden table, and windows that let in the evening light. Willa immediately set about making it livable, shaking out blankets and sweeping dust while Wren explored the space, and Winnie peered out the window hoping to spot the famous Rufus. True to his word, Dalton returned with an armload of firewood, followed by a gangly brown hound that immediately made friends with Winnie. He also brought a basket containing bread, cheese, dried meat, eggs, flour, and other supplies. "This is too generous," Willa protested, even as her stomach reminded her they had not eaten since morning. "My chickens lay more eggs than I can eat, and that bread would have gone stale," Dalton replied easily. "If you are feeling charitable, you might consider sharing your supper. My cooking skills begin and end with beans and hardtack, and I have been eating the same meal for 3 weeks straight." Wren laughed, the first genuine sound of joy Willa had heard from her sister in days. "Willa is an excellent cook. We would be happy to share if you do not mind waiting while she prepares it." That was how Dalton Hayes ended up sitting at the bunkhouse table an hour later, eating scrambled eggs with wild onions and fresh bread, toasted over the stove while Winnie fed scraps to Rufus and Wren told stories about their journey west. Willa found herself relaxing despite her usual wariness, drawn in by Dalton's quiet humor and the way he listened to her sisters with genuine interest. "So what brought you 3 all the way to Wyoming?" Dalton asked, sopping up the last of his eggs with bread. Willa's expression clouded. "Our parents died of fever 4 years ago. We went to live with our aunt in Kansas City, but she passed last spring. We heard there might be work in Laramie, so we took what little we had and started west." "I am sorry for your losses," Dalton said simply, and his sincerity made Willa's throat tighten. "What kind of work were you hoping to find?" "Anything honest," Willa replied. "I can cook clean, so Wren is good with figures and reading. We will do whatever we need to do to make a living." Dalton was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. "I have a proposition if you will hear me out. My ranch hands are out on a month-long cattle drive, and I have been trying to manage everything alone. The house needs cleaning. I need someone to manage the chickens and the kitchen garden, and there is mending piling up in my mother's old sewing basket. If you 3 would be willing to help out for the next month, I could offer room and board plus wages. By the time my hands return, you will have earned enough to repair your wagon and rent a place in town, or continue on if that is your preference." Willa stared at him, suspicious of such good fortune. "Why would you offer this to complete strangers?" Dalton met her gaze steadily. "Because this ranch has been too quiet since my parents passed 3 years ago. My mother always said a home needs laughter and life in it. This place has felt more like a way station than a home, just somewhere I sleep between working myself half to death. Maybe it is selfish, but having you 3 here, hearing actual conversation and laughter, it reminds me what I have been missing." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Think it over tonight. No pressure either way. You are welcome to stay in the bunkhouse regardless of your decision." After he left, the 3 sisters sat in silence for a long moment. Wren spoke first. "He seems kind and honest. I liked him," Winnie added. "And Rufus too." Willa chewed her lip, weighing risks and opportunities. They had few options, and Dalton's offer was more than fair. But accepting meant staying on an isolated ranch with a man they barely knew, relying on his good character and hoping her instincts were correct. "We will take him up on the offer," Willa decided. "But we stay alert and careful. At the first sign of trouble, we leave." The next morning, Willa woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of managing a household. She dressed quietly, letting her sisters sleep, and walked across the yard to the main house. Dalton was already in the barn, milking a cow, so Willa let herself into the kitchen and surveyed the situation. The room was functional but showed clear signs of bachelor neglect. Dishes were clean but haphazardly stacked, the floor needed sweeping, and dust coated every surface. Willa rolled up her sleeves and got to work, building a fire in the stove and starting coffee before tackling the cleaning. She was elbow-deep in scrubbing the kitchen table when Dalton walked in, carrying a pail of fresh milk. He stopped short, taking in the transformed kitchen and Willa's flushed face. "I take it that means you are accepting my offer?" he asked. "We are," Willa confirmed. "I figured I should start earning our keep." Something shifted in Dalton's expression, a warmth that made Willa's heart skip unexpectedly. "I appreciate it more than you know. Fair warning, my mother's chickens have gotten aggressive since she is not around to manage them. They might try to establish dominance." Willa smiled despite herself. "I am not afraid of chickens, Mr. Hayes." "Dalton," he corrected. "We are going to be working together. Might as well use first names, and I meant it about the chickens. That big red hen drew blood last week." Over the next days, the Hayes ranch underwent a transformation. Willa took over the kitchen with efficient competence, preparing meals that made Dalton close his eyes in appreciation after weeks of his own terrible cooking. Wren discovered the ranch's account books and offered to help organize them, revealing a natural talent for numbers that made Dalton's life considerably easier. Even Winnie found her place, gathering eggs, feeding the chickens with fearless enthusiasm, and following Dalton around the ranch asking endless questions he answered with patient humor. Willa found herself watching Dalton more than she intended. He worked from before sunrise to after dark, managing the ranch with steady competence. He was good with animals, gentle with Winnie, respectful toward Wren, and unfailingly courteous with Willa in ways that made her hyper-aware of his presence. When he came in for supper each evening, tired and covered in the day's work, he still made time to ask about their day and share stories about the ranch. 2 weeks into their arrangement, a spring storm rolled across the prairie, bringing wind and rain that battered the buildings and spooked the livestock. Dalton was out securing the barn when Willa noticed water pouring through a leak in the bunkhouse roof, soaking Winnie's bunk. "Come on," Willa said quickly, gathering her sisters. "We need to move your things before they are ruined." They dashed through the rain to the main house, arriving soaked and shivering. Dalton found them trying to wring out Winnie's blankets in the kitchen. "The bunkhouse roof is leaking," Willa explained apologetically. "I know we are imposing, but—" "You are not imposing," Dalton interrupted firmly. "This is exactly what the house is for. There are 3 bedrooms upstairs. My parents' room, my room, and the guest room. You 3 take the guest room and my parents' room. I can sleep on the couch down here." "We cannot take your bed," Willa protested. "You are not. I am offering it." Dalton's tone left no room for argument. "Now get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." "I will bring up some dry blankets." The guest room was small but cozy, with a double bed and a trundle. The parents' room was larger, with a 4-poster bed and furniture that showed careful craftsmanship. Willa ran her hand over the dresser, imagining the woman who had once arranged her belongings there. "What was your mother like?" she asked when Dalton brought up blankets. His expression softened with memory. "Strong, kind, had opinions about everything and was not shy about sharing them. She loved this ranch, loved filling it with life. She was always taking in stray animals, feeding ranch hands, inviting neighbors over for supper. My father used to joke that she never met a creature she did not want to mother. She sounds wonderful. She was. Dalton stood in the doorway, looking around the room. She would have liked having you three here, would have said the ranch needed young women with spirit and backbone. Their eyes met, and Willa felt something pass between them, an understanding or connection she could not quite name. The moment stretched until Winnie called from the other room, breaking the spell. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, Willa stared at the ceiling and tried to ignore the fact that Dalton was sleeping just downstairs. She told herself her awareness of him was simple attraction, nothing more. They had a business arrangement, and in 2 more weeks his ranch hands would return and the sisters would move into town. Getting emotionally involved would be foolish. But her heart, it seemed, had not received that message. The next day dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed. Dalton spent the morning repairing the bunkhouse roof while Willa worked in the kitchen garden, planting seeds and pulling weeds. She was covered in dirt when Wren came running from the barn, face flushed with excitement. "Willa, come quick. One of the cows is calving and having trouble." Dalton was already in the stall when Willa arrived, his sleeves rolled up and his expression focused. "The calf is turned wrong," he said tersely. "I need to help it along, but I cannot do it alone. Wren, get me rope from the tack room. Willa, I need you to hold the cow steady and follow my instructions." What followed was an intense hour of effort, with Willa holding the laboring cow's head, speaking soothingly while Dalton worked to turn the calf. His hands were steady and sure, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. Finally, with a rush of fluid and a weak ball, the calf slid free. "There we go," Dalton breathed, his face lit with relief and triumph. "That is a fine bull calf." Willa watched as he cleaned the calf's face and helped it breathe, his touch gentle despite his size and strength. The mother cow, exhausted but instinctively driven, began licking her baby clean. "You saved them both," Willa said softly. Dalton looked up and their eyes locked over the newborn calf. "We did. Could not have managed it alone." There it was again, that spark of connection that made Willa's breath catch. They were both filthy, covered in birth fluids and dirt, kneeling in straw in a barn stall, and yet she could not remember ever feeling more alive or present in a moment. "I should wash up," Dalton said, breaking eye contact first. But Willa noticed his hands trembled slightly as he wiped them on a rag, and she wondered if he felt it too, this growing pull between them. That evening they celebrated the successful birth with a special supper. Willa made fried chicken using eggs from their aggressive hens, biscuits with honey butter, and an apple pie from dried fruit. They ate at the kitchen table, now moved permanently into the main house since the sisters had essentially taken up residence there. "This pie is delicious," Dalton said, taking a second slice. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother taught me," Willa replied. "She believed good food was a form of caring for people. When you put effort into a meal, you are telling people they matter." "Then I must matter a considerable amount, based on how well I have been eating," Dalton said with a smile that made Willa's heart flutter. Winnie giggled. "Willa always cooks best when she wants to impress someone." Willa shot her youngest sister a quelling look, feeling heat rise in her cheeks, but Dalton's smile only widened. After supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky. Winnie had fallen asleep against Willa's shoulder while Wren read a book by lamplight. Dalton sat in a chair nearby, Rufus at his feet, his profile limned in golden light. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, not looking at Willa, "about your plans when my ranch hands return." Willa's stomach tightened with unexpected disappointment. Was he already planning their departure? "What about them?" "Well, I was wondering if you might consider staying on. Not temporarily, but permanently. You three have made this place feel like a home again. The house is cleaner than it has been in years, the garden is thriving, the books are organized, and even the chickens seem happier. He paused, finally turning to meet her eyes. But more than that, I find myself looking forward to meals because I will get to hear about Winnie's adventures with Rufus, or Wren's latest book, or your thoughts on whatever crosses your mind. The ranch needed laughter like yours. I needed it. Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. Dalton, I do not know what to say. You could say yes, he suggested softly. You could say you will stay and keep filling this place with life and laughter. I would pay proper wages, of course, and there is no pressure. If you would rather move into town and find other work, I understand completely. But Willa realized with sudden clarity that she did not want to move into town. She wanted to stay here, in this place that had begun to feel like home. She wanted to keep cooking meals for this man who appreciated them, keep watching him work with quiet competence, keep feeling this warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever he smiled. I would like that, she said. We all would, I think. But Dalton, I need you to understand something. I am responsible for my sisters. Their well-being comes first, always. I would not want it any other way, Dalton assured her. Your devotion to them is part of what makes you remarkable. The word remarkable echoed in Willa's mind long after they went inside for the night. She lay in bed, listening to her sister's breathing, and let herself imagine a future here. Not just as an employee, but as something more. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. 3 days later, a neighbor named George Pritchard rode up while Dalton was working on fence repairs. He was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and suspicious eyes that lingered too long on Willa when she came out to see who had arrived. Heard you took in some women, Pritchard said without preamble. That true? Dalton's expression cooled. I hired household help. Is that a problem? Might be, depending on what kind of help you are talking about. Pritchard's insinuation was clear and insulting. Dalton straightened to his full height, his easy manner replaced by something harder and more dangerous. You will watch your tongue when speaking about ladies in my employ, George. The Norwood sisters are my housekeepers and are to be treated with complete respect. If you cannot manage that, you can leave my property right now. Pritchard held up his hands. No offense meant, just looking out for you. People talk, you know. Then people should find better ways to occupy their time, Dalton replied coldly. Good day, George. After Pritchard left, Dalton found Willa in the kitchen, clearly having heard the exchange. I apologize for that, he said. George Pritchard is a busybody with too much time on his hands and not enough sense in his head. He thought we were something we are not, Willa said quietly, and his words could damage your reputation. I do not give a damn about gossip, Dalton replied with unusual vehemence. And I will not have anyone disrespecting you or your sisters. If Pritchard or anyone else has a problem with you being here, they can take it up with me directly. His fierce protectiveness made something warm unfurl in Willa's chest. She stepped closer, emboldened by his defense. Thank you for standing up for us. Always, Dalton promised, and the intensity in his eyes made Willa's breath catch. The moment was interrupted by Winnie bursting in with a basket of eggs, but the feeling lingered, a promise of something developing between them. That Sunday, Dalton surprised them all by suggesting they attend church services in Laramie. It is a way to introduce you properly to the community, he explained. Let people meet you and see you are respectable women, might cut down on gossip. The church was a simple wooden building that served as the social center of Laramie. Willa wore her best dress, carefully mended and cleaned, and stood beside Dalton as he introduced them to neighbors and townspeople. She was acutely aware of the curious stares and whispered conversations, but Dalton remained steadfast beside them, his presence a silent declaration of support. After the service, the town's minister, Reverend Samuel Black, approached with his wife Mary, a kind-faced woman in her 40s. "Dalton tells us you are helping with his ranch," Mary said warmly. "That is wonderful. His poor mother, God rest her soul, would be so pleased to know the house is being properly cared for again." "We are happy to help," Willa replied, grateful for the woman's genuine warmth. "You must come to Our Lady's social next week," Mary continued. "It is every Thursday afternoon. We sew, chat, and catch up on news. It would be a good way for you and your sister to meet the other women in town." Wren looked at Willa with hopeful eyes, and Willa found herself agreeing despite her usual wariness of social situations. She noticed how Dalton relaxed at Mary's invitation, the tension leaving his shoulders now that at least some members of the community were welcoming them. The following week passed in a comfortable rhythm. Willa continued managing the household while Dalton worked the ranch. But increasingly, she found reasons to seek him out during the day, bringing him water when he worked in the sun, or asking his opinion on the garden. He, in turn, began lingering in the kitchen after meals, talking long into the evening about his dreams for the ranch and asking about her hopes for the future. "What did you want to be when you were young?" Dalton asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the younger girls already asleep inside. Willa considered the question. "I wanted to be a teacher. I loved reading, loved the idea of helping children learn. But after our parents died, practical concerns took over. Survival became more important than dreams." "That does not mean the dreams are dead," Dalton pointed out. "Wyoming needs schools. Laramie has a schoolhouse, but they are always looking for teachers willing to work with the younger children." "I am needed here," Willa replied automatically. "You are wanted here," Dalton corrected gently. "There is a difference." "Willa, I do not want you to feel trapped by circumstances again. If teaching is what you want, we can find a way to make it work." She turned to look at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "What I want," she said slowly, "is to be somewhere I am valued and appreciated. I want my sisters to be safe and happy. I want to feel like I am building something, not just surviving day to day, and I have all of that here." "You do," Dalton agreed. "You absolutely do." He reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "Willa, I need to be honest with you. When I offered you work that first day, it was partly because I could not stand the thought of you three struggling alone. But over these past weeks, you have become essential to me. Not just for the work you do, but for who you are. I find myself thinking about you when I should be focused on cattle. I make excuses to come inside just to hear your voice. And I am starting to hope that maybe you feel even a fraction of what I am feeling." Willa's heart was racing. "What are you feeling?" "Like I want more than an employer-employee relationship," Dalton said honestly. "Like I want the right to court you properly, to see if this connection between us could become something lasting. But only if you want that too. I will not pressure you, Willa. You and your sisters always have a place here regardless of your answer." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing vulnerability and hope in his expression. "I want that too," she admitted. "I have been fighting it because it seemed complicated, but yes. I would like you to court me, Dalton Hayes." His smile was like sunrise, bright and warming everything it touched. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers down her spine. "Then I will do this properly. Tomorrow, I would like to take you on a proper outing, just the two of us. Wren is old enough to watch Winnie for an afternoon, and there is a beautiful spot by the creek I have been wanting to show you." "That sounds perfect," Willa whispered, feeling like her life was finally, miraculously, moving in the right direction. The next afternoon, Dalton helped Willa onto his horse and climbed up behind her, his arms around her as he guided the mare toward the creek. The contact was proper enough yet intimate, and Willa was intensely aware of his chest against her back, his breath stirring her hair. The spot he showed her was indeed beautiful, a curve in the creek where cottonwood trees provided shade and wildflowers dotted the banks. Dalton spread a blanket and unpacked sandwiches that Willa had prepared earlier. "This is where I come when ranch work gets overwhelming," he told her. "It reminds me why I am fighting so hard to keep this place running, the beauty and peace of it." They talked for hours, sharing stories from their childhoods and dreams for their futures. Dalton told her about learning ranching from his father, about the pride and burden of maintaining the family legacy. Willa spoke about her parents, about the responsibilities that had fallen on her shoulders so young, about her fears and hopes. "You ever resent it?" Dalton asked gently. "Having to raise your sisters?" "No," Willa said without hesitation. "They are the best parts of my life. But I will admit, there are times I wish I had someone to share the burden with, someone to lean on when things get hard." "You have that now," Dalton said, taking her hand. "If you want it. I know we have not known each other long, but Willa, I am serious about you, about us. I want to be that person you can lean on." "It is fast," Willa acknowledged, but her hand tightened around his. "But it feels right. You feel right." Dalton reached up, cupping her cheek with his free hand. "May I kiss you?" Willa's answer was to lean in, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Worth waiting for," Dalton murmured and kissed her again. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, and Willa knew from her sister's knowing grins that her happiness was written all over her face. She did not care. For the first time in years, she felt like something in her life was purely for her, purely about joy rather than duty. The courting continued over the following weeks. Dalton took Willa riding across the ranch, showing her every corner of his land with pride and affection. They attended a town dance where he waltzed with her under lantern light, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadow and sat with her on the porch every evening, talking until the stars came out. Wren and Winnie were delighted with the developing romance. Winnie made no secret of her hope that Willa would marry Dalton, while Wren, more circumspect, simply smiled when she caught them holding hands or saw Dalton's lingering glances at her sister. 6 weeks after the sisters had first arrived at the Hayes ranch, Dalton's ranch hands returned from their cattle drive. They were a rough but good-natured crew of 5 men who greeted Dalton with backslapping enthusiasm and viewed the 3 sisters with surprised curiosity. "Well, Dalton, you have been busy while we were gone," said Charlie Moss, the oldest hand at 45. "Never thought I would see the day this place had a woman's touch again." "These are the Norwood sisters," Dalton introduced them with unmistakable pride. "Willa manages the household, Wren keeps the books straight, and Winnie takes care of the chickens. They are the reason we have real food tonight instead of my terrible beans." The men laughed and welcomed the sisters warmly. At supper, Willa served roast beef with potatoes and vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and a cobbler made with preserved berries. The ranch hands ate with the enthusiasm of men who had been living on trail food for weeks. "Miss Willa, if you are ever looking for marriage proposals, you need look no further than this table," said young Tommy Crawford, not more than 20 and already blushing at his own boldness. "Better direct those proposals elsewhere," Dalton said firmly but with humor. "Miss Willa is spoken for." The men hooted and whistled while Willa blushed and tried to hide her smile. Wren kicked her under the table, grinning widely. After supper, Dalton pulled Willa aside. "I am sorry if that embarrassed you, but I wanted them to know you are not available, so there are no awkward situations." "I am not embarrassed," Willa assured him. "And I am glad you said something. Saves any confusion," he smiled, pulling her close. They were standing in the shadow of the porch, out of sight from the bunkhouse where the hands had retired. "I meant what I said. You are spoken for, Willa." "At least I hope you are." "I am," she confirmed, reaching up to touch his face. "Completely and thoroughly spoken for." Dalton kissed her then, deeper and more passionate than before, and Willa melted against him, feeling safe and desired and home. A week later, on a Sunday after church, Dalton suggested a walk. Willa agreed readily, and they strolled toward the edge of town where the prairie began, their hands clasped together. "Willa, there is something I want to ask you," Dalton began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "Actually, there is something I need to tell you first. I have been in love with you for weeks now. Since that day we saved the calf together, I think. Maybe before. You walked into my life and brought light and laughter and love, and I cannot imagine going back to how things were before. You challenge me, you support me, you make me want to be a better man. And your sisters, I have grown to love them too. Winnie's endless questions, Wren's quiet intelligence, the way you three support each other, it is beautiful to witness." He stopped walking and turned to face her, pulling a small box from his pocket. Willa's breath caught as he dropped to one knee right there on the prairie grass. "Willa Norwood, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, supporting you and your sisters, building a real home and family together? I promise to love you faithfully, to respect your strength and independence, to be the partner you can lean on when times get hard." Tears were streaming down Willa's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Dalton surged to his feet, catching her in his arms and spinning her around while she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. It was not elaborate, but it fit perfectly and gleamed in the sunlight. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother saved it for me to give to my future wife. I think she would have loved you." "I think I would have loved her," Willa replied, admiring the ring. "Dalton, are you sure about this? Taking on not just me but my sisters too?" "I have never been more sure of anything," he said firmly. "Willa, I am not just marrying you, I am choosing all three of you. We will be a family, properly and completely. Wren and Winnie will be my sisters too, and I will do everything in my power to give them good lives." "You already have," Willa whispered, pulling him down for a kiss. When they returned to the ranch, Wren and Winnie were waiting on the porch with barely contained excitement. Willa held up her hand, showing the ring, and Winnie shrieked with joy while Wren hugged her tightly. "Does this mean we really get to stay?" Winnie asked hopefully. "Forever." "Forever," Dalton confirmed, ruffling her hair. "This is your home now, all of yours." The wedding was planned for 3 weeks later, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that the wait became unbearable. Mary Black, the minister's wife, took charge with cheerful efficiency, organizing the other women in town to help. Willa found herself swept into a world of dress fittings, recipe sharing, and genuine friendship that she had not experienced since before her parents died. Her wedding dress was a simple cream-colored gown that Mary and several other women helped alter from a dress that had belonged to Mary's daughter. With lace added at the collar and cuffs and careful stitching to make it fit perfectly, it transformed into something beautiful. The night before the wedding, Willa sat with her sisters in the bedroom they shared. It would be the last night they would all sleep in the same room, as after tomorrow, Willa would move into Dalton's room as his wife. "Are you nervous?" Wren asked. "Terrified," Willa admitted. "And so happy I can barely stand it. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be too good to be true." "It is not," Wren assured her. "You deserve this, Willa. You have sacrificed so much for us. It is time you got something wonderful for yourself." "Dalton is wonderful," Winnie declared. "And he lets me help feed the cows, and Rufus sleeps on my bed sometimes. I am glad you are marrying him." Willa laughed, hugging both her sisters close. "I am glad too, so very glad." The wedding took place in the small church on a bright August morning in 1878. The pews were full of townspeople and neighboring ranchers, many of whom had become friends over the past weeks. Dalton stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Willa as she walked down the aisle on Charlie Moss's arm, the ranch hand having offered to give her away. Reverend Black performed the ceremony with warmth and joy, speaking about the providence that had brought Willa and Dalton together, and the love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. When it came time for vows, Dalton's voice was steady and sure. "I, Dalton Hayes, take you, Willa Norwood, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be a good husband to you and a good brother to Wren and Winnie. I promise to build with you a home filled with laughter and love, and to face whatever comes with you by my side." Willa's voice trembled with emotion but carried clearly through the church. "I, Willa Norwood, take you, Dalton Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through all of life's joys and trials. I promise to fill our home with warmth and laughter, to support your dreams and share mine with you. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Dalton kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Willa felt like she might float away with happiness, tethered only by Dalton's arms around her. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by half the town. There was music and dancing, laughter and joy, and Willa moved through it all in a daze of happiness. She danced with Dalton, with Charlie Moss and the other ranch hands, with Reverend Black, and finally with George Pritchard, who awkwardly apologized for his earlier rudeness and congratulated her sincerely. As the sun began to set and guests started departing, Willa found a moment alone with her sisters. "This does not change anything between us," she told them fiercely. "I am still your sister, still responsible for you, still here for you always." "We know," Wren said, smiling through tears. "But now you get to be happy too. You get to be a wife and not just a sister. You deserve that." "We are happy for you," Winnie added, "and we love Dalton. He is the best brother we could have asked for." That night, as Willa stood in Dalton's room, now their room, she felt a moment of nervousness. But when he came in and took her in his arms, the nervousness faded, replaced by love and trust and anticipation. He kissed her gently, then more deeply, and Willa surrendered to the joy of being not just wanted but chosen, loved, cherished. "I love you," Dalton whispered against her hair. "My remarkable, strong, beautiful wife." "I love you too," Willa replied, her heart overflowing. "My kind, steadfast, wonderful husband." The first months of marriage were an adjustment but a joyful one. Willa learned the rhythms of being a wife as well as a sister, balancing her care for Wren and Winnie with her new relationship with Dalton. He was an attentive and affectionate husband, showing his love through both words and actions. He made sure Willa had time for herself, encouraged her interests, and never made her feel like she had to choose between him and her sisters. Wren flourished under the stability, her natural intelligence given room to grow. She began helping Dalton not just with the books, but with ranch management decisions, showing a keen understanding of business that impressed him. At 16, She was too young for formal education beyond what was available in Laramie, but Dalton purchased books on mathematics and business, and Wren devoured them eagerly. Winnie, meanwhile, had become a fixture around the ranch. She was not yet 12, but already showed a fearless affinity for animals. The aggressive chickens had become docile under her care. The cattle let her approach without spooking, and even Dalton's temperamental mare seemed to gentle in her presence. As autumn painted the prairie in gold and amber, Willa realized she had missed her monthly courses. The realization brought a flutter of excitement and nervousness. She waited another month to be sure before telling Dalton, wanting to be certain. When she finally told him on a crisp October evening as they sat by the fire, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms, his face alight with joy. "A baby," he breathed. "We are having a baby. Willa, that is the best news I could have imagined." "You are happy?" she asked, needing the reassurance even though his reaction made it obvious. "Ecstatically happy," he confirmed, kissing her soundly. "You are going to be an amazing mother. Well, you already are to Wren and Winnie, but now we get to have a baby together, our child. I cannot wait." The pregnancy was relatively easy, for which Willa was grateful. She continued managing the household with help from Wren, who insisted on taking over more of the heavier tasks. Dalton became almost comically protective, worrying about her exerting herself and insisting she rest more than she felt necessary. Winter came to Wyoming with snow and bitter cold, but the Hayes house remained warm and full of life. Christmas was celebrated with a tree decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments that Winnie made, a feast that Willa prepared with Wren's help, and gifts exchanged with much laughter. Dalton gave Willa a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, soft wool and deep blue that brought out her eyes. She gave him a new hat she had saved money for, and a scarf she had knitted herself during the long evenings. They gave Wren a new set of ledgers and advanced mathematics books, which made her eyes shine with delight. Winnie received a new dress, a set of wooden horses Dalton had carved himself, and a puppy from one of the ranch dog's litters, which she immediately named Daisy. As Willa's pregnancy advanced and her belly swelled with their growing child, she found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for how her life had changed. A year ago, she had been desperate and lost, trying to reach a town where she had no connections and no guarantee of work. Now she had a home, a husband she loved deeply, security for her sisters, and a baby on the way. In late March of 1879, when the first signs of spring were appearing on the prairie, Willa's labor began. Mary Black and another experienced woman from town, Sarah Jenkins, attended her while Dalton paced anxiously downstairs with Wren and Winnie. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Willa endured it with gritted teeth and determination, focused on the goal of meeting her baby. Finally, just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the room. "It is a boy," Mary announced joyfully. "A healthy, strong boy." Willa sobbed with relief and joy as they placed her son in her arms. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair and his father's nose. She counted his fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of him. When Dalton was finally allowed upstairs, he stood in the doorway for a moment, his eyes suspiciously bright, before crossing to the bed and sitting carefully beside Willa. "Our son," Willa said softly, showing him the bundle in her arms. Dalton reached out with one finger, touching the baby's tiny hand. Instantly, the infant's fingers curled around his father's finger, and Dalton let out a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "He is perfect," Dalton whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Willa. Thank you for him, for everything." They named him Daniel Everett Hayes, Daniel after Dalton's father and Everett after Willa's. Wren and Winnie were enchanted with their nephew, taking turns holding him and arguing gently over who got to help more. The ranch hands were delighted with the baby's arrival, and Charlie Moss carved a beautiful wooden cradle as a gift. Neighbors brought food and baby clothes, and the house was full of visitors for weeks. As Willa recovered and learned the exhausting rhythms of new motherhood, she was grateful for the support system around her. Dalton was a devoted father, taking over Daniel's care whenever possible to give Willa rest. Wren and Winnie helped with household tasks without being asked. The entire household reorganized itself around the baby, and somehow it all worked. By the time summer arrived, bringing warm sunshine and the endless work of a working ranch, Willa felt like she had found her balance. She managed the household with Daniel on her hip, nursed him in the rocking chair by the window while watching Dalton work outside, and fell into bed exhausted but content every night. One evening, when Daniel was 4 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Willa and Dalton sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "You remember that first day?" Dalton asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When your wagon broke down and I found you three looking lost and determined." "I thought you were too good to be true," Willa admitted. "I kept waiting for there to be a catch." "The catch was that I was already falling for you," Dalton said with a smile. "The moment you stood there covered in dust, chin up, refusing to show weakness even though you must have been terrified, you were magnificent." "I was desperate," Willa corrected, "but I am glad my desperation led me to you." "Not just you," Dalton pointed out. "Your wagon brought 3 orphaned sisters west, and this lonely cowboy said his ranch needed laughter like yours. Turns out I needed so much more than laughter. I needed you, needed all of you." Willa leaned into him, feeling his warmth and solidity. "We needed you too. You gave us a home when we had nowhere to go. You gave us security, family, love. You gave me a partnership I never thought I would find. We gave each other everything that matters," Dalton said softly, "and we are going to keep building on it. This is just the beginning, Willa, our beginning." The years that followed proved him right. Wren grew into a capable young woman who helped manage the ranch's business affairs with skill that rivaled any accountant. At 20, she married a young teacher who had come to Laramie and appreciated her intelligence and independence. They settled in town, and Wren divided her time between her own home and the ranch, unable to stay away from the family she loved. Winnie never lost her affinity for animals. At 15, she was helping Dalton train horses, and by 18 was known throughout the territory for her skill. She eventually married one of Dalton's ranch hands, a kind man named Thomas who worshipped the ground she walked on, and they built a house on Hayes land, staying close to the family that meant everything to her. Willa and Dalton had 3 more children over the years. A daughter they named Ruth, who had her mother's determination and her father's kind heart. Another son called Matthew, who was quiet and thoughtful. And finally, another daughter, Grace, who arrived when Willa was 35 and was spoiled by her older siblings and doting parents alike. The ranch prospered under Dalton's management and Willa's organizational skills. They became known throughout the territory, not just for their quality cattle, but for their hospitality and the warmth of their home. Their door was always open to neighbors, to travelers needing a meal, to anyone who needed help. On their 20th anniversary, Dalton took Willa back to the spot by the creek where he had first kissed her. It was late summer and the same wildflowers dotted the banks, the same cottonwoods provided shade. "You remember what you said here?" Dalton asked, taking her hand. "I said you felt right," Willa replied, smiling at the memory. "And you have every single day since." "I told you then that I wanted to be someone you could lean on," Dalton said. "Have I managed that? You have been everything I needed and more than I dared hope for," Willa assured him. "You took 3 desperate, lost women and gave them a home. You loved us when we needed love most. You built a life with me that has exceeded my wildest dreams." Dalton pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "That wagon breaking down was the best thing that ever happened to me," he said. "It brought you into my life. Brought laughter and love and a reason to build something lasting. You transformed my house into a home, Willa. You transformed me." "We transformed each other," Willa corrected. "We built this together, Dalton. Every bit of it." They stood there as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other in the vast Wyoming Territory and built something extraordinary. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. In the main house, their children played while Wren visited with her own baby daughter. Winnie's laughter carried from her house across the way. The cattle grazed peacefully, the chickens roosted, and Rufus's grandson dozed on the porch. It was not the life Willa had imagined when she had set out from Kansas City with her sisters, desperate and uncertain. It was infinitely better. She had found not just survival but joy, not just shelter but a home, not just security but love that filled every corner of her life. That night, lying in bed with Dalton's arms around her and the sounds of their sleeping children down the hall, Willa thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss and grief, the fear and uncertainty, the broken wagon wheel that had seemed like disaster but had been, in truth, providence. She thought about the lonely cowboy who had said his ranch needed laughter, not knowing that what he really needed was love. What they both needed was each other. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Dalton murmured, half asleep. "For seeing us that day. For stopping to help. For taking a chance on 3 orphaned sisters with nothing but determination and hope." Dalton's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for saying yes. For staying. For building this life with me. I love you, Willa Hayes. Today, tomorrow, and always." "Always," Willa agreed and let herself drift into sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and blessings. Daniel grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning every aspect of cattle ranching and land management. He had his mother's intelligence and his father's steady nature, and it was clear from early on that he would one day take over the family business. Ruth, their eldest daughter, inherited her Aunt Wren's head for figures and her mother's organizational skills. At 16, she was already helping manage the household accounts and planning to study business at a women's college back east, though she swore she would return to Wyoming because the territory was in her blood. Matthew was the artist of the family, always sketching the landscape, the animals, the people around him. Dalton encouraged this talent, proud of his son's unique gifts even if they were different from his own. Willa framed Matthew's drawings and hung them throughout the house, each one a window into how her son saw the world. Grace, the baby of the family, was sunshine personified. At 8 years old, she charmed everyone she met and kept the entire household entertained with her stories and observations. She followed her father around like a shadow, and Dalton doted on her shamelessly. One autumn afternoon, when Willa was 43 and the first hints of gray were appearing in her hair, she stood in the kitchen preparing supper while watching her family through the window. Dalton was teaching Grace to rope fence posts, his patience endless as she tried again and again. Daniel was riding in from checking the northern pastures. Ruth was reading on the porch while Matthew sketched her portrait. Wren arrived with her 3 children for Sunday supper, as had become tradition. Her husband helped Dalton with Grace while Wren came inside to help Willa with the meal. Winnie and Thomas would arrive soon with their twin boys, who were 5 and absolutely fearless. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Wren asked as she peeled potatoes. "When the wagon broke." "All the time," Willa admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how uncertain, and I think about how that moment of disaster turned into the greatest blessing of my life." "Mine too," Wren said softly. "You saved us, Willa. Everything you did, every sacrifice you made, it led us here, to safety, security, family. I know I do not say it enough, but thank you." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "You and Winnie are my greatest accomplishments. Watching you both build happy lives, seeing you settled and loved, it is everything I wanted for you." The sisters embraced, and then Winnie burst through the door with her twin boys, filling the kitchen with noise and laughter. The chaos of family supper began, with children running around, adults talking over each other, food being passed, and love saturating every moment. After the meal, after Wren and Winnie's families had departed and their own children had gone to bed, Willa and Dalton reclaimed their spot on the porch. It was cool now, autumn in the air, and Dalton draped a blanket around both their shoulders. "Big family," he observed contentedly. "The best family," Willa agreed. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life, that I get to have all of this." "You deserve every bit of it," Dalton said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know, Willa. The way you kept your family together, the way you never gave up even when things were impossible, it is extraordinary. You took every hardship and turned it into something beautiful." "We did that together," Willa insisted. "I provided the determination, but you provided the foundation. You gave us a place to build from. You loved us when we needed it most." Dalton kissed her temple. "Still do. Will keep loving you until my last breath and beyond." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. A coyote called in the distance, and from the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. Everything was peaceful, everything was right. "You have any regrets?" Dalton asked eventually. "Things you wish you had done differently?" Willa considered the question seriously. "No major regrets. There are small things, of course. I wish my parents could have met you, could have seen their grandchildren. I wish the journey west had been easier on Wren and Winnie. But the big things, the choices that mattered, no. Every decision led me to you, to this life, and I would not change any of it. Even the broken wagon," Dalton teased gently. "Especially the broken wagon," Willa laughed. "That disaster was the beginning of everything good in my life. It brought me to you." "It brought you to me," Dalton echoed. 3 orphaned sisters and 1 lonely cowboy, all needing what we found here: family, home, love, laughter. "You said your ranch needed laughter like ours," Willa remembered, "but it needed so much more, and we needed everything you gave us." "We saved each other," Dalton said simply. "And we built something that will last long after we are gone. Our children, our grandchildren, they will carry this forward. The love we built, the home we created, it is our legacy." As if to prove his point, a light flickered on in Daniel's room. Through the window, they could see their eldest son sitting at his desk, probably working on ranch accounts or planning future improvements. In another room, Ruth was still reading by lamplight. Matthew's room was dark, but knowing their son, he was probably sketching by moonlight. Grace's room was quiet, the little girl sleeping peacefully. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the love that permeated every corner of this place. The family they had built, blood and chosen and bound together by something stronger than either. "I love you, Dalton Hayes," Willa said, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "I love you, Willa Hayes," Dalton replied. "Thank you for that day, for every day since, and for all the days to come." They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, then climbed the stairs to their bedroom, hands clasped together. In the morning, there would be work to do, meals to cook, a ranch to run, children to raise. But tonight, there was only this: two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of extraordinary love. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Daniel married a sweet girl from town and brought her to live at the ranch, learning management in preparation for eventually taking over. Ruth went east for school but wrote letters full of homesickness and returned every summer, each time more determined that Wyoming was where she belonged. Matthew's art gained recognition, and he began selling pieces to galleries in Denver and Cheyenne, though he never strayed far from the family ranch. Grace grew into a young woman who combined her father's kindness with her mother's fierce determination. Wren's children thrived, as did Winnie's, and the extended family gatherings grew larger and more boisterous with each passing year. The Hayes Ranch became known not just as a successful cattle operation, but as the heart of a sprawling, loving family network that supported each other through every hardship and celebrated every joy together. As Willa and Dalton grew older, their love deepened and matured like wine, becoming richer and more complex with time. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, and found comfort in simply being together after decades of partnership. On their 30th anniversary, their children organized a party that drew people from across the territory. The ranch yard was decorated with lanterns, tables groaned under the weight of food, and a fiddle band played while couples danced under the stars. Dalton led Willa to the makeshift dance floor and pulled her close, moving to the music with the ease of long practice. Around them, their children danced with their own spouses, their grandchildren ran and played, and friends and neighbors celebrated with them. 30 years, Dalton marveled. Best 30 years of my life. Mine too, Willa agreed, though that first year was pretty remarkable. Going from lost and desperate to loved and secure in a matter of months. You were never truly lost, Dalton corrected. You always knew where you were going, even if you did not know the destination. You were heading toward home. It just took a broken wagon wheel to get you here. To get us both where we needed to be, Willa amended. You were just as lost as I was, Dalton. You just hit it better. This ranch was empty before we arrived. Now look at it. They both looked around at the celebration, at the life and laughter filling every corner of the place that had once been so quiet and lonely. This was what they had built together, this abundant, overflowing life. I would do it all again, Dalton said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. All of it just to end up right here with you. So would I, Willa whispered, tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. So would I. The music swirled around them and they danced until their feet ached, then danced some more. Because this was their celebration, their life, their love, and every moment of it was precious. As the years continued to pass, Willa and Dalton gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting Daniel and his wife to manage things while they enjoyed a slower pace. They traveled a bit, visiting Ruth in Denver, where she had eventually settled with her banker husband, attending exhibitions of Matthew's art, and doting on their ever-growing number of grandchildren. But they always came home to the ranch, to the place where their love story had begun. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands while watching the sunset, still found new things to talk about after decades together. Wren and Winnie remained close, their families intertwined with Willa and Dalton's in ways that made it hard to tell where one ended and another began. The three sisters had survived losing their parents, traveling across the country, and building new lives in a harsh landscape. Their bond, forged in hardship and strengthened by love, remained unbreakable. One spring morning, when Willa was 68 and Dalton 70, they rode out to the creek together, moving slower than they once had but still steady in the saddle. It was the place where he had first kissed her, where he had proposed, where they had returned countless times over the years to remember and renew their love. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that wagon had not broken?" Dalton asked, helping Willa down from her horse. "Sometimes," Willa admitted. "We would have gone to Laramie, probably not found the work we hoped for and struggled to survive. I would have found something eventually. I always did. But it would have been harder, lonelier. We might never have met." "Unacceptable," Dalton declared, making her laugh. "The universe knew we belonged together. If the wagon had not broken, something else would have brought you to me." "You sound very certain of that." "I am. Some things are meant to be, Willa. You and me, we were always meant to find each other." The broken wagon was just Providence giving us a push in the right direction. They spread a blanket by the creek and sat together, Dalton's arm around Willa's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The water burbled over stones, birds sang in the cottonwoods, and wildflowers painted the banks in purple and gold. "I am so grateful," Willa said softly, "for all of it. The good and the hard, the struggles and the triumphs. It has been an extraordinary life, Dalton. Better than anything I could have imagined." "It is not over yet," Dalton pointed out. "We still have time. More grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch, more moments like this." "I know, and I treasure every single one." Willa lifted her head to look at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago still present in his weathered face and storm-gray eyes. "I love you, have loved you for 46 years, and I will love you for however many more we are granted." "Then we are matched," Dalton said, cupping her face gently. "Because I have loved you from the moment you stood beside that broken wagon, determined and brave and beautiful. And I will keep loving you into eternity." He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of decades of devotion, and Willa felt like the luckiest woman who had ever lived. They were granted another 12 years together, years full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of watching their ranch continue to thrive under Daniel's management, of seeing all their children settled and happy. Wren passed first, peacefully in her sleep at 78, and Willa grieved the loss of the sister who had been her first responsibility and her lifelong friend. But she found comfort in Wren's children and grandchildren, in the legacy of strength and intelligence Wren left behind. Winnie outlived her sister by 5 years, still working with horses until the very end. She died at 83, surrounded by family, her last words a thanks to Willa for keeping them together all those years ago. Dalton passed at 82, his hand clasped in Willa's, his children and grandchildren gathered around him. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to Willa, and he went peacefully, a man who had lived fully and loved completely. Willa lived for 2 more years, staying in the house she had shared with Dalton, cared for by her devoted children. She spent her days telling stories to her great-grandchildren, sharing memories of the journey west, the broken wagon, the lonely cowboy who had offered help and ended up offering his heart. "Tell us again how you met grandfather," Grace's daughter begged, curling up beside Willa's chair. And Willa would smile and begin the story she never tired of telling, about 3 orphaned sisters traveling west with hope and determination, about a wagon's broken wheel that seemed like disaster but was really destiny, about a lonely cowboy who said his ranch needed laughter but really needed love, about how they found each other in the vast Wyoming Territory and built something extraordinary together. "Love is like that," Willa would conclude, looking at the faces of her descendants, seeing Dalton in their features, seeing her sisters in their expressions, seeing the future stretching out before them. It finds you when you least expect it, often in the middle of disaster, and it transforms everything. Your grandfather transformed my life. We transformed each other. And the love we built, it lives on in all of you. She passed quietly one autumn evening, with the sunset painting the sky in the colors she had loved and her family surrounding her. Her last thought was of Dalton, waiting for her, and of the life they had built that would continue long after they were gone. The Hayes Ranch continued to prosper, generation after generation carrying forward the legacy of love and laughter that Willa and Dalton had established. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments lead to the greatest blessings. The house remained full of life, just as Willa and Dalton had wanted. Children played in the rooms where they had raised their family. Couples sat on the porch at sunset, continuing the tradition Willa and Dalton had started. The land was worked with love and respect, honoring all they had built. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was right, people swore they could hear laughter carried across the prairie, the sound of 3 orphaned sisters who had found home and a lonely cowboy who had found family, their joy echoing through the years, eternal and undiminished. Their wagon had brought 3 orphaned sisters west. Their lonely cowboy had said his ranch needed laughter like theirs, but what they had really found was each other, and in finding each other they had found everything that mattered: love, home, family, purpose, joy. It was a story that began with disaster and ended with devotion, that spanned decades and generations, that proved the power of taking chances on strangers who become family, and broken wheels that lead to whole hearts. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild Wyoming Territory, rooted in the soil of the Hayes Ranch, and living on forever in the hearts of those who heard it told. A reminder that home is not a place you find but something you build, one choice, one moment, one act of love at a time. And it all started with 3 orphaned sisters, a broken wagon, and a lonely cowboy who offered help and ended up offering his entire heart.